A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History. Part 2. Bloodstains in Paradise. Mother Nature, the bloody bitch. We do not see or forget that birds which are idly singing around us mostly live on insects or seeds and are thus constantly destroying life. Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species. Mankind has always been cutting one another's throats. Do not believe that hawks have always preyed upon pigeons. Then if hawks have always had the same nature, what reason can you give why mankind should change theirs? Voltaire. In 1580, Michel Montaigne inspired the new discovery of the New World tribes untouched by humans, by Europe's latest complexities, initiated the idea of the noble savage. Nearly 200 years later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau popularized the concept, which he publicized 4 works, proclaiming that man is born innocent, a wonder, filled with love and generosity, but a Luciferian force ensnares him. Modern civilization, Rousseau claimed that without civilizations, humans would never know hatred, prejudice, or cruelty. Today, Rousseauistic doctrine seems stronger than ever. 20th century writers and scientists like Ashley Montagu, Claude Levi-Strauss, who hailed Rousseau as the father of anthropology, Eric Johnson, David Barish, Richard Leakey, and Susan Sontag reworked the notion to condemn our current industrial civilization. They have been joined by numerous feminists, environmentalists, minority rights extremists, even such august scientific bodies as the American Anthropological Association, the American Psychological Association, and the Peace and War section of the American Sociological Association have joined the cause absolving natural man of malevolence by endorsing the Seville Statement, an international manifesto which declares that violence is neither in nor evolutionary legacy nor in our genes. As a result, we are told almost daily that the modern Western culture, with its consumerism, its capitalism, its violent television shows, its blood-soaked films, and its nature-mangling technologies, programs violence into the wild-out human mind. Our society is supposedly an incubator for all that appalls us. Everybody blames TV and rap on what? Programming the human mind. It's been said that culture does not add. What it does is it reveals what's inside. Culture is shaped by the environment and what? Our biology. However, culture alone is not responsible. However, look at this. However, culture alone is not responsible for violence, cruelty, and war. Just what I said. Despite the Seville Statement, contentions, our biological legacy weaves evil into the substrate of even the most unspoiled society. What's more, organized battle is not restricted to humans. Ants make war, and either massacre or enslave a rival swarm. Cichlid fish gang up and attack outsiders. Maxobacteria form wolf packs that corner and dismember prey. Groups of lizards pick on a formerly regal member of the clan who has become disfigured by the loss of his tail. Female bees chase the overaged queen through the corridors of the hive and lunge, biting over and over until she is dead. And even rival super coalitions of of a half dozen male dolphins fight like street gangs, often inflicting serious injuries. Ants do not watch television. Fish seldom go to the movies. Maxobacteria, lizards, dolphins, and bees have not been programmed by Western culture. This is how they do a lot of experiments. They eliminate human culture by using animals. A host of writers gained attention in the late 80s and early 90s with books that celebrated a return to a mothering earth. They felt if we scraped away large-scale agriculture, internal combustion engines, televisions, air conditioners, nature would turn to bless us with her primordial paradise. Unfortunately, these authors held a distorted view of pre-industrial reality. A pride of lions at their ease enjoys the kind of nature the radical environmentalists dreamed about. You can see smiles on lions' faces as they lick their paws and stretch out on the ground side by side, clearly pleased with the comfort of each other's warmth. You can see the benevolence with which a mother keeps a cub from playfully tearing her tail apart. She lifts her huge paws and gently shoves the infant aside when the nipping becomes too painful. But nature has given these lion mothers only one way of feeding their children: the hunt. This afternoon, these peaceful creatures will tear a gazelle limb from limb. The panicked beast will try frantically to avoid the felines closing in on her, but they will break her neck and drag her across the plain, still kicking, alive and kicking. Her eyes will be open and aware as her flesh is gashed and torn. Suppose for a minute that lions were suddenly stricken with guilt about their feeding habits and swore off meat. What would they accomplish? They would starve themselves and their children. For nature has given them only one option: to kill. Killing is not an invention of man. It is an invention of nature. It's in the genes. That's what he's trying to tell you. Nature's amusements are cruel. A female sea turtle crawls painfully up the beach of a tropical island, dragging her bulk across the sand. Slowly she digs a nest with her hind flippers and lays her eggs. This is the sea turtle. It's the same thing that Quigley actually used. From those eggs come a 1,000 tiny irresistible babies digging out of the sand, blinking at the light for the first time, rapidly gaining their orientation from a genetically pre-programmed internal compass, then taking their first walk, racing toward the sea. As the infants scoot awkwardly across the beach, propelling themselves with flippers built for an entirely different task, seabirds who have been waiting for this feast swoop down to enjoy meal after high-protein meal. Of 1,000 newborns, perhaps 3 will make it to the safety of the ocean waves. Quigley said exactly that. Are these birds sadistic creatures whose instincts been twisted by an overdose of television? No, they're engaged in the same effort as the baby turtles, the effort to survive. Hegel, the 19th century German philosopher, said that true tragedy occurs not when good battles evil, but when one good battles another. Very interesting. Nature has made that form of tragedy a basic law of her universe. She presents her children with a choice between death and death. She offers a carnivore the options of dying by starvation or killing for a meal. We do that all the time. We call it raising cattle and raising chickens. Or hunting. We hunt just like they do. Nature is like a sculptor, continually improving upon her work. But to do that, she chisels away at living flesh. What's worse, she has built her morally reprehensible modus operandi into our, look at this. She has built her morally reprehensible modus operandi into our physiology. If you occasionally feel that you are of several minds on one subject, you are probably right. In reality, you have several brains. And those brains do not always agree. Dr. Paul D. MacLean was a researcher who first posited the concept of the triune brain. According to MacLean, near the base of your skull, you'll find the stem of the brain poking up from the spinal column, like the unadorned end of a walking stick. Sitting atop that rudimentary stump is a mass of cerebral tissue from the spinal column, like the unadorned end of a walking stick. Sit atop of the rudimentary stump of the cerebral tissue bequeathed us by our earliest totally land-dwelling ancestors, the reptiles. When these beasts turned their backs on the sea roughly 300 million years ago and hobbled inland, their primary focus was simple survival. The new landlubbers needed to hunt, to find a mate, to carve out territory, and to fight in that territory's defense. The neural machinery they evolved took care of these elementary functions. MacLean calls it the reptile brain. The reptile brain still sits inside our skull, the pit of the center of a peach. It is a vigorous participant in our mental affairs, pumping its primitive, instinctual orders to us at all hours of the day and night. Eons after the first reptiles ambled away from the beach, their great-great-grandchildren, many times removed, evolved a few dramatic product improvements. These upgrades included fur, warm blood, the ability to nurture eggs inside their own bodies, and the portable supply of baby food we know as milk. These remodeled creatures were no longer reptiles. They had become mammals. Mammals' innovative features gave them the ability to leave the lush tropics and make their way into the chilly north. Their warm blood allowed them, in fact, to survive the rigors of the occasional ice age. But warm blood exacted its cost. Remember this from last week. It demanded that mammal parents not simply lay an egg and wander off. It forced mammal mothers to brood over their children for years. In other words, ladies, it's instinct. It's biological instinct. And it required a tighter social organization to take care of these suckling clusters of mammal mamas and kids. What do you think the family or the extended family is built around? The family structure, the extended family structure, is a biological and cultural instrument. I keep saying that over and over and over again. It's an instrument. Culture does not come willy-nilly. He's telling you right there. This is why you have a family. This is what marriage and all these things that we built as an organization on top of to do. What I said that marriage is for. Marriage is for what? Children. All this demanded that a few additions be built onto the old reptilian brain. Nature complied by constructing an envelope of neural tissue. That tissue surrounded the reptile brain like a peach's juicy fruit enveloping the pit. MacLean called the add-on the mammalian brain. The mammalian brain guided play. Look at this. The mammalian brain guided play, maternal behavior, and a host of other emotions. This is before we even get to the thinking brain. It kept our furry ancestors knitted together in nurturing gangs. The family or the group predates our thinking mind, predates our culture. Far down the winding path of time, a few of our fuzzy progenitors tried something new. They stood up on their hind legs and looked around them and applied their minds and hands to the exploitation of the world. These were the early humans, but the proto-human aspirations were impractical without the construction of another set of add-ons to the brain. Nature complied, wrapping a thin layer of fresh neural substance around the two old cortical standbys, the reptilian and the mammalian brains. The new structure stretched around the old ones like a peach's skin was the neocortex, the primate brain. The primate brain, including the human brain, had some awesome powers. It could envision the future. It could weigh a possible action and imagine the consequences. It could support the development of language, reason, and culture. This is where we are. This comes from what? The neocortex, the primate brain. But the neocortex had a drawback. It was merely a thin veneer on the two ancient brains. The oldsters were as active as ever, measuring every bit of input from the eyes and ears and issuing fresh orders. The thinking human, no matter how exalted his sentiments, was still listening to the voices of a demanding reptile and chattering ancient mammal. Both were speaking to him from the depths of his own skull. Richard Leakey, the eminent paleoanthropologist, says, war didn't exist until men invented agriculture and began to acquire possessions. In the back of Leakey's mind, one hears a wistful prayer that agriculture would go away so we could rediscover peace. But Leakey is very wrong. Violence is not a product of the digging stick and a hoe. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa lived the people we called Kung. The Kung have no agriculture, very little technology. They live off fruit and plants. Their women gather, and the animals. The fruits and plants, and women gather, and the animals their men hunt. Their way of life is so simple that hordes of anthropologists have studied them. The same with the Jawara tribe, right off the coast of India. The same thing. Convinced that the Kung live as our ancestors must have over 10,000 years ago, before the domestication of plants. In the early years of Kung ethnography, anthropologists became wildly excited. These simple people had no violence, they said. Anthropology had discovered the key to human harmony, abolished the modern world, and returned to hunting and gathering. Richard Leakey used the Kung as his model of paradisal pre-agriculturalists. The Kung way of life proved that without the plow, men would not have the sword. Yet later studies revealed a blunt and still under-publicized fact. Kung men solved the problem of adultery through murder. As a result, Kung have a homicide rate higher than in New York. Oh, thou shalt not commit adultery. It didn't come from the Ten Commandments, did it not? Kung violence takes place primarily between individuals. intimate partner violence. In both humans and animals, however, the greatest violence occurs not between individuals but between groups. It is most appalling in war. Here's where it gets interesting. This is why I suggest this book for women. Dian Fossey, the woman who devoted 19 years to living amongst the mountain gorillas of Central Africa's Virunga Mountains, felt these creatures were amongst the most peaceful on earth. Yet mountain gorillas become killers when their social groups come face to face. Clashes between social groups, said Fossey, accounts for 62% of the wounds on gorillas. 74% of males, Fossey observed, carried scars of battle. 80% had canine teeth they'd lost or broken when trying to bite the opposition. Fossey actually recovered skulls with canine cusps still embedded in their crest. One gorilla group would deliberately seek out another and provoke look at this. Humans still do this, like gangs, right? One gorilla group will deliberately seek out another and provoke conflict. The resulting battles between gorilla tribes are furious. One of the bands that Fossey followed was led by a powerful silverback, an enormous male who left a skirmish with his flesh so badly ripped that the head of an arm bone and numerous ligaments stuck out through the broken skin. The old ruling male, whom Fossey called Beethoven, had been supported in the fight by his son, Icarus. Icarus left the battle scene with 8 massive wounds where the enemy had bitten him on the head and arms. The site where the conflict had raged was covered with blood, tufts of fur, and broken saplings, and diuretic dung. Such is the price of pre-human war in the Virunga Mountains. Gorillas are not the only subhumans to cluster in groups that set off to search for food. In the early 70s, Jane Goodall had lived 14 years amongst wild chimpanzees of Tanzania's Gombe Reserve. She loved the chimps for their gentle ways, so different from the violence back home amongst humans. Yes, there were simian muggings, beatings, and rage, but the ultimate war was absent. Goodell published a landmark book on chimpanzee behavior, In the Shadow of Man, a work which some proved unequivocally that war was a human creation. After all, creatures shown by genetic and immunological research to be our nearest cousins in the animal kingdom knew nothing of organized wholesale violence. Then, 3 years after Goodall's book emerged, a series of incidents occurred that horrified her. The tribes of chimps Goodall had been watching became quite large. Food was harder to find. Quarrels broke out. To relieve the pressure, the unit finally split into 2 separate tribes. One band stayed in the old home territory. The other left to carve out a new life in the forest to the south. At first, the 2 groups lived in a relative peace. Then the males from the larger band began to make trips south to the patch of land occupied by the splinter unit. The marauders' purpose was simple: to harass and ultimately kill the separatists. They beat their former friends mercilessly, breaking bones, opening massive wounds, and leaving the resultant cripples to die a slow, lingering death. When the raids were over, 5 males and 1 elderly female had been murdered. The separatist group had been destroyed. Its sexually active females and part of its territory had been and part of its territory had been annexed by the males of the band from the home turf. Jane Goodall had discovered war amongst chimpanzees. It was a discovery she had hoped she would never make. Years later, biological ecologist Michael Gallagher traveled to Uganda to see just how widespread chimpanzee warfare really was. He concluded that the happy-go-lucky chimpanzee has turned out to be the most lethal ape, an organized cooperative warrior. So the tendency toward slaughter that manifested itself in the Chinese Cultural Revolution is not the product of agriculture, technology, or television, or materialism. It is not an invention of either Western or Eastern civilization. In fact, it is not uniquely human. It is not a uniquely human proclivity at all. It comes from something both sub and superhuman. Something we share with gorillas, apes, fish, and ants. A brutality that speaks to us through the animals in our brain. If man has contributed anything of his own to the equation, it is he has learned to dream of peace. But to achieve that dream, we have to overcome what nature has built into him. Women are not the peaceful creatures you think. Here we go. I am a man who will fight for your honor. I'll be the hero you are dreaming of. From a pop song by Peter Cetera. Males play the greatest role in stirring up bloodbaths. They do most of the killing. And they do most of the dying. You see that now. Look at the murder rate. The murder rate for males is 5-1. This makes men sound pretty atrocious, and indeed they are. Males by far outdo females in aggression. Remove the testicles from a rooster, and it becomes a peace-loving bird. Sew the testes back into its stomach, and the masculine hormones once flood the fowl's bloodstream. Now the mild-mannered chicken struts off to start a fight. It's not surprising when folks declare if we only had female leaders, war and international aggression would rapidly disappear. Many people are convinced that females are inherently peaceful. Okay, so Margaret Thatcher, the female Prime Minister of Britain, won the Falklands War, supplied the British military with nuclear submarines, and packed those subs with atomically tipped ballistic missiles. Indira Gandhi led a military campaign against Pakistan, jailed her opponents, and suspended civil liberties. And Peru's Shining Path guerrilla assassination squads were headed almost entirely by women. But surely those are just aberrations. Or are they? Evidence from the world of our closest relatives in the primate family indicates that the cheerfully idealistic picture of women is a bit of a self-delusion. Females, too, are victims of the Lucifer principle. Diane Fossey, the chronicler of the Central African Gorilla Mountains, has been following a gorilla band for 9 years when she suddenly noticed that one of the tribe's babies had disappeared. This came as a shock. The baby hadn't been sick. Fossey couldn't understand what had happened to it. The naturalist and her aides hunted through the forest looking for the remains of the body, expecting to find it in one of the spots where the guerrilla group had fought with a rival band. But Fosse found no corpse whatsoever at the battle sites. Finally, acting on a hunch, Fosse and her African helpers collected all of the dung the guerrillas had left during the previous days. After all, their years following this group, the researchers were able to identify which dung came from which guerrilla. For days, the humans painstakingly sifted through the foul-smelling excrement. Finally, Fosse found what she'd been looking for: 133 bone and tooth fragments from an infant gorilla. Where were those fragments? In the deposits left by the dominant female and her 8-year-old daughter. The mother of the dead baby came from a social level these female gorilla aristocrats despise. She was an outcast. The well-placed ladies frequently mocked and bullied. Her presence simply could not be tolerated in proper company. Her child was beneath contempt. Fosse concluded that the head female and her daughter had attacked the infant, killed it, and eaten it. So much for peaceful females, right? There was more than mere cruelty behind this murder of a helpless baby. Effie, the aristocratic female who had apparently led the infant-killing effort, was heavily pregnant. 3 days after the brutal incident, she gave birth to a baby of her own. Effie had acted like the unambitious wife in a harem who fights to eliminate children of her rivals. Through infanticide, she had become the only female with 4 children in the group at one time. She ensured that her and her brood would be the tribe's ruling class. By doing so, she had turned the entire support group into a support mechanism for her own brood. Remember in the old European stories, fairy tales, it was never the evil stepfather. It was the evil who? Stepmother. Women and females protect their own nest. That's what they do. They protect their own nest. If anybody's going to eat, it's going to be their children. They protect their own offspring. That's how come men normally, if they have their children in tow, they're less likely to marry. They're less likely to bring their children around other women because of this. Effie was very much like Livia, the most powerful woman of Rome in the days a little less than 2,000 years ago, when that city was reaching the peak of imperial power. According to Robert Graves' careful reconstruction in I, Claudius, Livia, like Effie, was one of a number of wives, and like Effie, Livia was mated to the dominant male in the pack. Specifically, Livia had managed to inveigle into matrimony a man named Augustus Caesar, the leader who had grabbed the reins of Rome from his rivals and stabilized the empire in a time of turbulence. In the process, Augustus had become the most powerful man the world had ever known. Guerrillas managed to keep a whole gaggle of wives trailing behind them simultaneously. Augustus didn't have that privilege. The law forced him to possess his official mates one at a time. Livia was Augustus' third wife. She had won him when she was a tender 17. Well, maybe not so tender. According to Graves, the teenage beauty had grown contemptuous of a previous husband because the unlucky gentleman believed in such outlandish principles as liberty for Rome's citizens. Livia had no patience with these notions. She was convinced that all power should be centered in the hands of one man, preferably a man under her direct control. The alpha male, right? So she had divorced her soft idealist and sought out a harder husband whose possibilities were more in line with her own aspirations. Female hypergamy, right? At the time, Augustus was married to someone else. In fact, he had a number of children by the woman at his side. And he seemed reasonably pleased with his old wife's ways. But that didn't stop the ambitious young Livia. She managed to tarnish the reputation of the existing spouse to drive an additional wedges between the unfortunate lady and her husband. She inserted herself into the gap, making her presence the only logical consolation for Augustus' distress over his wife's disgrace. Livia quickly consolidated her hold over Augustus. Okay. Soon he would not make a major. She made him her simp. Soon he would not make a major decision without her. Like Effie the gorilla, Livia had struggled to become the first lady in the band. Like Effie, Livia was ambitious for more than just herself. She was ambitious for her children. Rome had been run in the past by a democratic state, but Augustus was shifting power into the hands of one man, emperorship. Livia wanted the newly established imperial throne to go to her own brood. It wouldn't be that easy. There were rival claimants to the seat of imperial authority. First in line were two of Augustus' old friends and confidants. But more important, there were Augustus' three grandchildren by the previous wife. One by one, according to Graves, the rivals died off. Some collapsed mysteriously, others came down with lingering diseases, yet others suffered inconsequential wounds but were given the wrong medical treatment. Surely Livia's expertise in poisons and her network of murderous helpers, much like the cooperatively cannibalistic crones in Effie's guerrilla clique, had nothing to do with these deaths. Finally, only Livia's children were left, as Graves put it, to carry on the line, Livia's line. Livia, like Effie, had eliminated her children's rivals and guaranteed her offspring a spot on the top of the heap. At least she had the good taste not to eat her victims. Oh, so female. A woman's first loyalty is not to her man, it's to her nest. A female's first loyalty is to her nest. If you don't get anything out of this that I've just said, that's something you should take away. A female's first loyalty is to her nest. Get it? Got it? Good. One empress in China, roughly 1700 years ago, took Livia's ambitions several giant steps further. To ensure her children power over the empire, she eliminated every single individual in a rival extended family. In all probability, this minor act of manslaughter was not limited to a mere handful of human obstacles. Chinese noble families of this period usually had hundreds or even Chinese noble families of the period usually had hundreds or even thousands of members. Livia, Effie, and the Chinese empress were as bloodthirsty as any male. The motivation that drove them was distinctly maternal, the desire to give every advantage to their young. That's why colorism exists. That's why mate choice is on what? Looks and resources exist for the female. I'll read it again. And the motivation that drove them was distinctly maternal. The desire to give every advantage to their young. Get it? Got it? Good. Pay attention, lady. This is game. This is deep game that I'm giving you. Pay attention. Women are violent. In fact, females are as much as a part of the apparatus that triggers. Look at this. Women are violent. In fact, females are as much a part of the apparatus that triggers male violence as the men themselves. Nobel Prize winning ethologist Conrad Lorenz described a common behavior in several species of ducks. The female runs out to the edge of her husband's territory and tries to provoke another duck, then runs back to her male, stands next to him, and looks back over her shoulder at the enraged rival in hope that her male will jump into the fray. Many human... Is this on? Is this on? Many human females have tried to stir up a similar fight. Women encourage killers. They do it by falling in love with warriors and heroes. Men know it and respond with overwhelming enthusiasm. Why do women love thugs and bad boys? Why do women love thugs and bad boys? The Crusaders marched off to a war with a lady's favor in their helmets. They were not setting out on some mission of gallant gentleness. On their way through Asia Minor, the Crusaders literally roasted Christian babies in the cases of mistaken identity. Because the local folk did not speak a language they understood, the chivalrous knights assumed the panicky babblers were heathens. Heathens, of course, deserved no mercy, so the heroes sliced up the adults and baked the infants on spits. They did eat children. All the while thinking of how the girls back home would admire their bravery. Got to remember, Europeans ate children. Baking infants on spits. He didn't say it, but the European people, children were what? Food. Don't get it twisted. In a famine, don't think that the adults are going to go out and not and die peacefully. They will kill a rival's children and eat it. Technically, it's called sexual selection. The females of a species developed a craving for a certain kind of guy, and all the males compete to live up to the female ideal. Technically, it's called sexual selection. Get it? Got it? Good. Lady peacocks adore hunks with towering blue tails. So peacock gentlemen sport foppish plumes. Bowerbirds swoon over bachelors with architectural flair. So bowerbird males turn sticks and scraps into a Taj Mahal. And what have human females gone for in nearly every society? In time, courage and bravery, in short, violence. The classic poetry of the 6th century Arab master Labid is a testament to the feminine ability to bring out the animal in man. Labid's lyrical verses: a young fellow jostles along his camels, dreaming of how he can get his beloved's attention. She, it seems, does not recognize his true worth. This is the nice guy. His dreams are how he will prove himself to her and how he will demonstrate his manliness with feats of daring glory. Now, what is the one feat of daring glory guaranteed to rivet the admiration of a beauty in Labid's tribal desert society? To rush into the nearest village and kill a few of the males and steal as many camels and old clothes as you can get your hands on. Greatness belongs to the killer, and the young ladies swoon over guys who are great. Labid will tell you it works every time. Nice guys do finish last, do they not, ladies? Even T.S. Eliot's terribly erudite Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the intellectualized cry of man who feels women will not look up on him with admiration and bear his children unless he wins their attention with a few violent deeds. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each, mopes the protagonist. I do not think that they will sing to me. What would get these lovely girls in the sea to give the poet to each? Mopes the protagonist. I do not. Okay. What will get these lovely girls in the sea to give the poet a second look? Well, it could be a bit more like Prince Hamlet, able to finally make a decision and kill. But the poet hesitates. He is not the kind of person to take decisive measures. He imagines himself growing old, a foolish, lonely man ignored by women all his life. Finally, he consoles himself. There will be time, he says, to murder and create. Yes, the man said murder. But females do not do more than provoke violence amongst males. They engage in it themselves. Primatologist Gene Altman, studying the female baboons of Kenya's Ambolose National Park, noted that when a new baby baboon arrived, the females all rushed over to see it. As they grew older, the baboon ladies come back in time and time again. At first glance, their interest looked touchingly affectionate, but upon closer inspection, it was anything but. During a typical incident, a mother and baby sat in the savanna grass. A high-ranking female walked haughtily over to the pair. She tugged gently at the baby's arms. When the mother would not give up the baby, the socially superior female grew impatient. She tugged the arm more violently. Then she yanked the baby's leg. The mother reared back, bared her teeth, and made a warning sound. She knew what this meddler was really up to. Given half the chance, the lady of lofty social standing would grab the infant, manhandle or womanhandle the squealing child like a rag doll, drag it around, pass it back and forth to her friends, and injure the baby so badly that her interest might very well prove fatal. The chattering anger of the mother did its work. The female from a higher social sphere went back to her clique. The mother was a member of the underclass. What do men say women desire most? Status. Elite women have a class. The 92 octane doesn't come out of nowhere. Remember when I said 92 octanes is a economic social class? This is where it comes from. The mother was a member of the underclass, looked down upon by the haughty and none too kind members of the female in group. Can we say colorism? Darkism? Where do you think this stuff comes from? The worried soul spent the rest of her day clinging tightly to her infant. She could not gather as much food as she needed for herself and her baby. She was too preoccupied with protecting her offspring from the unforeseen attack. Her child wriggled impatiently in her arms. Further research suggested that it wanted to go off on its own and have a good time. But this was one baby which would never have the freedom to run and play. It would never be able to wrestle and roll about with the children of the more dominant females. It would never experience that easy social access which leads itself to self-confidence and a quick mind among baboons. Ultimately, like its mother before it, it would live its adult years at the bottom of the social pile. Get it? Got it? Good. Class and status mean way more to the female than it does to the male. As the baboon's mother was forced to smother it overprotectively to ensure that it survived. For among baboons, the babies of the dispossessed have the omnipresent mortal enemy, females of the tribe. Let's be blunt. It's useless for women to blame. Let's be blunt. It's useless for women to blame violence on men. And it would be futile for men to blame violence on women. Violence is built in both of us. When Margaret Thatcher constructed a nuclear navy, she was not behaving in a manner distinctly male, nor was she behaving in a manner distinctly female. She wasn't even obeying a set of impulses that are uniquely human. Thatcher, like Rome's Livia, was in the grip of passions that we share with gorillas, baboons, passions implanted in our primordial layers of the triune brain. Okay, we got 8 minutes. Now, this is why I suggest this particular book. He talks about group dynamics, both male and female, but I love how he focuses on females because that is underrepresented. This book, or these sections, enlightened me. And it got me to understand the true nature of women, of the female, not just women or basically human females, but female nature. Female nature is to do what? Give its offspring a better chance. Give its offspring dominance, if it can, over the rest of the group. It uses violence not only by her, but by the men. Right? You see that, right? That's the reason that men of higher status get the women. That's the reason they are hypergamous. It's not just black females. A lot of violence that you see in the inner city is not just because of the men. Without drug money, there would be no proliferation of drug dealers. There would be no drug violence. The women are just as violent as the men. The women stir the violence up in the men. The women encourage the men to deal drugs by what? Mate selection. It's not something that's just created by the culture. I saw it in the 80s. Mate selection by what? Drug money. The men, the formal men that were out and couldn't get any women, they were considered the lames, the original lames, the guys that couldn't read or write, they were on the street, couldn't get no women because they had no money. All of a sudden, drugs came in, and they were willing to commit violence. To do what? Get women. They sell drugs to get women. And it wasn't just because they were taught that. It's something that is inbred into human beings. And to believe that women have no part in this kind of violence is foolish. You got to understand it. This is something that drives us. All these structures that we have built around us do not come out of nowhere. The one thing that Bloom does that most anthropology books don't do, he distinctly decided to deal with the negative side of evolution, the negative side of human nature. Especially with women. We always want to believe that women are kind and good and docile creatures that are what? Are acted upon. They're not just acted upon. They actually do come out and actually do things. That cattiness you see amongst women, the competition you see amongst women, this is where it comes from. The women want to get a man to what? Go up in status. Why do you think the trap, the cars and the clothes and that's peacocking? Where do you think peacocking comes from? Okay. Why do they call it peacocking? That's how come the flashy clothes and the cars and whatnot and the lifestyle appeal to women. It doesn't just appeal to women because they think it's cute. They appeal to women because the lifestyle or the apparent or the look of the lifestyle does what? Talks to her biology. Her biology says that this will give my children status, fame, and resources so that they can have the advantage over what? Other people's children. That's why feminists, right after white women got what they wanted out of black women, try to dismantle affirmative action. Why? Not because they felt solidarity with their what? With their black sisters. No, you're a rival group. And it wasn't that they cared about getting theirs. They did. But the thing is, they dismantled affirmative action so that what? That their sons and their daughters could have an advantage over who? Over you. Donald Trump is one of those reactions. Now, why do you think 56% of white women voted for Donald Trump? They want an advantage over who? Rival groups. And I want my ladies to stop believing the bullshit. This is why I'm going through the book. This is why this book was important to me to understand females, and it should be important to you to understand the same thing. But the hour is up. It might be a little less than that when I edit it out. But until next time, ladies, this is BGS out.